Now, while Forrest Lamp was my #1 graded offensive lineman in this draft class, for my money, the guy that I see having the most upside and the guy that I would pound the table for the most to be the offensive lineman I would take if I was in a position to take one and I had to choose one would be Cam Robinson from Alabama. I was interesting with him. After his sophomore season, you were seeing all types of mock drafts that had him top 10, maybe top 5. Then the off the field arrest happens, and his junior year kind of happens. And there were some really, really good moments. People talk about the game against Texas A&M where you did a pretty good job against Myles Garrett, hobbled or not. Cam Robinson had a really good game. But then there were other games that he didn't look like the type of prospect that he should look like. So he could be a frustrating guy to watch on film because when you look at Cam Robinson, he passes the eyeball test, that's for sure. 6'6", 322 pounds. You're talking about a guy that definitely has the size to play on the outside, especially when you take that height, that length, weight, and then that length as well. He's got that prototypical left tackle type of size. And then you look at him, he's a really, really strong dude, and that strength shows on the film, which is the most impressive thing, and in particular shows as a run blocker. This dude is a mauler. He can push people back. He can pancake dudes. I mean, he's a force in the running game. So it's easy to understand why some people would project him in the more traditional right tackle type of mold, or you hear somebody like a Mike Mayock talking about maybe want to make him into a Semele type and playing him inside a guard because they think this dude can absolutely be a force in the running game, and they're right. He can come in right away, in my opinion, and be a top 10 or 12 run blocker at his position in the NFL from day one. The film showed me that he was that good of a run blocker. But unfortunately, when you're talking about taking guys to play on the outside, in particular at left tackle, you're drafting them in that position first and foremost for their ability as a pass blocker and for the things they can do. Do they have the feet, the technique, the knee bend, the pad level, all of that? And that's where Cam Robinson can get really frustrating. As a pass blocker, he does lack the elite feet, I think, to hold up consistently against speed rushers. Doesn't mean that he can't play left tackle at the NFL level, because if you're big enough, strong enough, your technique's good enough, and you're long enough, it can compensate for that lack of natural foot quickness and that lack of quality footwork. But what really concerns me is he has a bad habit of stopping his slide step and his lateral movement to turn and run to try and hold the edge because he's really trying to compensate for his poor fundamentals and his lack of lateral agility. And oftentimes you'll see him in pass protection where he gets off balance, and that can cause all types of problems because he puts himself into really bad situations, and good defensive ends are potentially going to eat him alive at the NFL level. There are times his hand usage can be frustrating too, because there are times where he can be an absolute beast. He can be vicious and explosive with his initial punch, but then other times he gets way too wide and low with his punch, so he loses any type of leverage that he needs. Other times he gets really narrow and he loses leverage that way. It's so frustrating because you see this dude and you're like, you went to Alabama. You can see the God-given natural abilities there. You can see the physical talents are there. And you wonder, why did he not get coached up better? Or did he not work hard enough to progress and get better to become the type of player that his type of body and his physical talents indicate that he should be? He's just a really frustrating prospect, again, to watch on film, because I see a dude that if he was better as a pass blocker, you would be talking about him legitimately being a top 5 pick in this draft. But again, he's not the best pass blocker. He gets in really bad position with his body. He is very quick to break off of his side, off of his shuffle step, because he just doesn't have that foot speed and he doesn't compensate for it in other areas. His hand usage is inconsistent, which leads to his leverage being inconsistent. Like I said, sometimes he can use that length to tremendous advantage, but he's inconsistent with it. At times he plays with really good balance and pad level and knee bend, and other times he's atrocious. While he's very good at maintaining his technique and his form with his run blocking, it's not as important there just because he's so big, long, and strong that he can compensate for some of the lack of technique even there. Concern also I have for him is that I don't think he's a great athlete. I don't think he's a terrible athlete, but he's not the most explosive off the line. He struggles to get going laterally. Um, in terms of getting out of his stance and pulling or getting out there for the trap block, he's adequate, but he can get beat to the spot quite often, especially if he's not going full bore. I thought his effort and motor were okay, but not super special. He showed some nastiness, especially again as a run blocker. I keep coming back to the run blocking because initially that's what's going to help him stick at the NFL level. I do like the fact that even when he does initially get beaten, sometimes you'll have those offensive linemen that they get beaten and then they throw the lookout block where they just kind of stand there, look stupid, and yell to the quarterback, look out. He's a dude that still tries to fight and he still tries to keep his block. He just doesn't always do it. Sometimes, though, when he gets in a situation where he doesn't have anybody immediately in front of him, instead of looking for somebody to block, he just kind of stands around. I'd like to see him be a little nastier and mix it up a little bit more, but it's not the biggest deal in the world. One thing that's going to be a concern for him is that he's had some minor injuries. It hasn't really caused him to miss a bunch of game time. Um, but that's one of those things. Is he going to be a guy that has nagging injuries here and there, and he struggles to be 100% effective? Also, you have the off the field arrest that came in between his sophomore and junior year. Just really kind of sounded like a stupid situation. I know ultimately the charges were dropped or whatever, but it still wasn't a good situation. Thankfully for him, he played at Alabama, where they don't give a shit about disciplining off the field incidents. So he was at other programs, he might have actually gotten suspended for a game or two. Maybe. We're talking about major college football here. They don't give a shit. If he'd have went to Baylor, they'd have told him, rape a bitch. We'll make you a star. Anyways, so when I look at him, at Cam Robinson, you're going to ultimately get down to the debate of what position he can play at the NFL level. And you're going to hear the Mike Mayock thought process. And like I said, I believe he compared him to Colecchio Simile. And I see some of that comparison. This big mauling run blocker with all types of length and strength and great size that you put inside, and you could potentially be an all-pro based off of the strength of his run blocking and the fact that his lack of great footwork and pass blocking technique won't get as exposed outside. You get other people that'll talk about him having to play right tackle because he doesn't have the feet to play left tackle. And the more and more that I think about this, I just think that this whole difference between left tackle and right tackle is a bunch of old school bullshit. And I reference this a little bit in the Forrest Lamp video, but I'll reference it here too. I look at a team like I mentioned before, the Denver Broncos, when they had both Von Miller and DeMarcus Ware. You could have the best left tackle in the world, but if your right tackle shit, you're still screwed. And I know you kind of go off of the mindset that the majority of the time, the best pass rusher on the defense is going to play on the right side of the defense, but that's not always the case. J.J. Watt primarily lines up on the left side last time I checked. So is it more important if you play in a division with, let's say, the Houston Texans to have a stud left tackle or to have a stud right tackle? It's probably more important to have the stud be wherever J.J. Watt's going to line up 70 to 80% of the fucking time. I'm just saying. So to me, sometimes we get so caught up in this guy's got to play left tackle or he could only play right tackle. There are times based off of the system, based off of the opponents, what fucking difference does it make? Either you have the feet and the technique and the skill to play outside or you got to go inside. I'm sorry, it's just something that as I think about it more and more, it starts to aggravate me. And I think it's one of the most overrated things that the so-called experts, all of us fucking talk about, is the fact that these guys can't stick it right or left tackle. They have to go to the right side. How much different is it really? How much different is it truly? Just ask yourself that. In terms of an NFL comparison, he reminds me some of Cordy Glenn when he came out of, what was it, Georgia, where he ended up going in the second round because while he had played left tackle in college, there was a lot of thought that he couldn't stick there. He didn't have the athleticism and the feet to be able to play there. But ultimately, he did get drafted there. He became a serviceable tackle who became a really good left tackle who got paid a shit ton of money. That's the type of dude that I see Cam Robinson being. Now, in terms of my grading for him, he's my number 2 offensive lineman in this draft class, my number 1 tackle. I think ultimately he is a tackle at the NFL level. He's one of those guys that if you try him out at tackle after a couple of years and it doesn't work out, sure, you could flip him inside to guard, but I don't see where you have to do that. To me, I look at Cam Robinson and I see a guy that could profile on the outside at the NFL level, and I think actually could play left tackle. Call me crazy. My grade for him is an 89.5. Um, so he's at the very, very top of the second round grading. In all intents and purposes, he's one of the top 32 prospects in this draft. He's a first round pick, in the grand scheme of things. And again, if I'm sitting there looking to draft an offensive lineman, I have to give a lot of thought about Cam Robinson because of the fact I believe he can stick outside, because of the fact I believe he has left tackle ability. And if he does, he has the most upside at that position. He's the guy you should take first. That's just my version of things. In terms of where he potentially goes in this draft, I think you have a few teams that you could look at and say you could see where maybe it would happen. Pick 16, Baltimore. Cam Robinson seems to be the type of dude. He played at Alabama. He would allow them to replace Ricky Wagner with another young tackle to bookend with Ronnie Stanley, similar to what the Titans did with Taylor Lewan and Jack Conklin. So there's a possibility there. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers at pick 19 might heavily look at somebody like a Cam Robinson because at the end of the day, while they got somebody like a Deshaun Jackson in free agency, they still need to get better offensive help around Jameis Winston, and one way to do that is giving better protection up front on the offensive line. You look at other teams, you could maybe have the Denver Broncos at pick 20. I think that's probably the floor for Cam Robinson. You're going to have some teams that probably look at him as a second-round talent. You might have a few teams that look at him with the top 10 grade. Ultimately, it only takes one team to fall in love with the dude. I think his draft range, honestly, could be anywhere from like pick 11 all the way down to pick 20. It's not necessarily just because of the teams, just in terms of the draft range. I'd be really, really surprised if Cam Robinson, A, made it outside of the top 20, and B, wasn't the first offensive tackle taken in the 2017 NFL draft.